No! Please!
The 17th century was one of the darkest chapters in human history. Massacres, persecution and cruelty formed a tragic part of daily life. Children would grow up to see suspected witches burned at the stake, opponents to the government publicly disemboweled, criminals hanged or broken at the wheel, or even starved dogs pitted to fight each other for the sake of entertainment. Child abuse was not unheard of, and drunkenness a rampant issue. So, all in all, there was no shortage in men to pass on the torch of cruelty. And all of this in the so-called Golden Age of piracy. Pirate cruelty is well known. Sensational accounts of their crimes have been popular even in the period itself. In recent times, some have tried to explain their behavior as strategic. Books like The Invisible Hook try to establish a logic in where pirates would reward those who surrendered and punish those that resisted. Cruelty was used as a method of intimidation. The fact is that when reading first-hand accounts of pirates and their deeds, you'll discover that they were completely arbitrary. There are times when those who fought back were celebrated for their bravery, or even punished for not fighting back. It doesn't matter what we today find logical. These were desperate, violent men, perhaps traumatized, usually drunk. Torture was used for a variety of purposes, and the playbook contained an endless list, ranging from the simple beating to the methodical gauntlet, all of which we'll get into in this episode. So strap yourself down and have some liquid courage. You might need it. In the period, torture was most commonly used as a tool of interrogation, both by soldiers and government authorities. Mercenaries were known to be especially unhinged, and most of the atrocities of the 30 Years' War were committed by hired blades looking to squeeze a few bucks from their prisoners. Pirates were no different, and their need for information was high. They would make small descents onto isolated farms and hamlets, or capture fishing and messenger boats. Though these people would have next to nothing of value, they would be interrogated for their knowledge of nearby towns or where a wealthy ship might be headed. Some of them could even be taken as pilots and guided the pirates to their destination. Pirates' intelligence gathering was surprisingly sophisticated, and we know quite well what they sought in their sessions. William Dampier provided an exhaustive list in his New Voyage Around the World, containing questions regarding a city's racial demographics, wealth, defenses, layout, and whatever else their curiosities demanded. This knowledge gave them a considerable edge. Of note is that no prisoner was spared interrogation, and of course, that it could be conducted without the use of torture. And as aforementioned, pirates could act irrationally, even if you told them all you knew. John Watling executed a prisoner, precisely for telling the truth. Watling wanted to attack the city of Arica. The old man said it was heavily defended, so Watling shot him and attacked anyway. It was a disaster, with Watling himself dying in combat. When a ship or a town was captured, they would tie up the captives and confine them in a central location, a prison, essentially. In towns, they typically used some large and open public building, churches mostly. At sea, prisoners were stored in the ship's hold and locked down in bilboes, a sort of iron bar going over your ankles. Edward Lowe, one of the cruelest pirates, and a name oft repeated in this video, was noted for having a consort ship as a sort of prison. It's likely that pirates used their tenders, supply ships, for this purpose. From these dank prisons, the pirates would drag the captives to be used at their leisure. Wealthy prisoners would be interrogated to reveal the location of their treasure. This was when torture was most often used. Treasure could be concealed in hidden parts of the ship, or buried somewhere on land. Pirates might also keep the prisoners as hostages for a prisoner exchange, or to ransom them. Oftentimes, they wanted recruits. If prisoners refused to join them, the pirates might keep them in chains until they complied. Until then, they might be pressured. Some pirates tried enticing the recruits with alcohol and promises of wealth. Others would isolate and starve them. Allegedly, Henry Morgan did this to a woman who refused to have sex with him. Torture could be used as a punishment, either against an external party, if they had somehow displeased the pirates, which could really happen for whatever reason. If the victim fought back, if the victim hadn't fought back, you name it. More often it was used as a punishment against a pirate who broke the rules, This could be anything from bringing your girlfriend aboard, stealing from the crew, or deserting. A specific punishment might be dictated in the Articles of Agreement. Others were decided on the spot by the captain or the crew in council. Some have argued for pirates using torture as a psychological tool. If a pirate could establish a fearsome reputation as one who'd punish stubborn enemies, he might make them surrender more easily. This wasn't really the case. When you were attacked by pirates, it was hard to know which pirate it was in particular. Most of them didn't have unique flags, and flags could be hard to recognize anyway. All pirates were feared equally, due to the reputation they had built up over the century, and if a merchant surrendered, it was usually due to the inability to defend themselves. Some pirates relied on scare, shock, and surprise tactics, of course, but these were deliberately deployed to avoid causing unnecessary carnage. The pirates who made the most use of scare tactics, Bellamy and Blackbeard, were likewise documented as being some of the most lenient. If a pirate was going to torture someone to scare them, the mindset to do so was already there and just looking for a reason. Indeed, torture was often just used for the hell of it. Revenge was a powerful motivator. Members of a certain religion, nation, or culture might be abused simply for belonging to said group, and perceived offenses, historical and recent. Conversely, belonging to a certain group might save you from the rack. French pirate John Hamlin had a tendency of flogging and murdering his English victims, but left Dutchmen well alone. The best example would be Francois l'Olonnais. According to legend, his crew were massacred by the Spanish, leaving him as the lone survivor. He had to mix sand with his own blood and hide himself among the bodies. This might have been the reason for his extreme cruelty. Or it's just a story. There was no shortage of national grudges. All sides perpetuated violence against each other, continuing the Caribbean cycle of bloodshed. Some pirates had been enslaved by the Spanish, escaped, and sought revenge. However, many of them had been enslaved, explicitly for being pirates, and likely causing untold atrocities against the Spanish. Then of course, there were those really bad eggs, torturing simply for their own sick amusement. Some might have been psychopaths, others the victims of trauma. Edward Lowe, for example, often spoke about the death of his wife. He always released men who were married, so even the worst of them could have a soft spot. And that's the thing about these madmen. When Lowe heard of his forced men planning a mutiny against him, he laughed and forgave them. They were just as likely to let you go with a clap on the back as to burn you alive. Before we get into the real methods of pirate torture, we can briefly tackle two of the techniques very much associated with them, but which they never used. One of them is keel hauling, the act of dragging a victim along the length of the ship's keel. Since the bottom hull is coated with barnacles and maritime growth, you'd be lacerated, possibly drown, or suffer head trauma. This method is incredibly convoluted, and though it has received some documentation, it's so scarce in the period as to make it unremarkable. No records exist of pirates practicing it. There were much more efficient methods. Neither did pirates ever make their victims walk the plank. The method was never documented during the golden age of piracy, and doesn't appear in historical records until the mid-18th century. It wasn't used by pirates, but by mutineers. The idea was that by blindfolding a deposed officer and making them walk the plank, the mutineers could avoid the penalty of murder. That's some big brain thinking. Again, it's another overly complicated and inefficient method. If pirates wanted to execute someone, they'd throw them into the sea, or simply shoot them. One method used in the period does resemble both of the aforementioned. It was called ducking. The victim was hoisted up to the yard arm of a mast and dropped into the sea to plunge painfully beneath the surface and then bob back up again like a duck. It was practiced by the Royal Navy, but I've never found any instances of pirates doing it. And now, we can move on to the methods themselves. The most simple of them was a good beating. Fists could be used, especially in a fit of rage. Richard Taylor was known for beating up his men if they ever disobeyed. Beatings could also be dragged out over a longer session and used as a slow torture. Strap them to a chair, tie them upside down from the mast, a slap here, a punch there. If you're tired of using your fists, there were tools to help you along the way. Sticks, clubs, and canes. Cobbing was a nautical punishment, in which the offender was spanked a certain number of times with a flat piece of wood called the cobbing board. It was chiefly used as a punishment to those who fell asleep at their night watch. The next step was to beat someone with naked swords. The technique is to slap hard with the flat side of a blade, so that any flinch could cause the victim to be cut. The fear of being nipped often outstripped the actual pain, so that it could easily be used as a tool for interrogation. During one incident, a pirate used this technique until his sword broke in half. For any torture, the victim was typically tied to an object, sometimes a chair in a cabin, often publicly on the ship's deck, either against a mast or the capstan. In one incident, the pirates tied a victim to the windlass and pelted him with glass bottles. They cut and bruised him, and when the pirates tired, they shot him. Flogging was one of the most common punishments in the period. It was done on land against adulterers, escaped slaves, and aboard a ship by the navy, merchants, and pirates. It's effective, quick, and cheap. You can really use anything: a rope, a quirt, or even a special whip designed for this purpose. The Cat of Nine Tails is a multi-tailed flail, named so because its mark resembles a claw, and because there's always enough room to swing a cat on deck. After the victim had been flogged, their wounds might be rubbed with salt. This was called whipping and pickling. In the Navy, a commander was not permitted to punish a seaman beyond 12 lashes on his bare back. If the crime deserved greater punishment, he was to be confined until a court-martial. Sometimes they exceeded this number, but rarely above 24. The number was about the same in the merchant marine, where floggings were unusual in the first place. This was actually more lenient than civilian floggings, which were often arbitrary. They seldom exceeded the biblical number of 40, Moses' law, which pirates often abided by. Despite pirates often complaining about the cruelty of merchant and navy captains, they were typically crueler. Gambling, brawling, and risking a fire could all be punished by 39 lashes. Dismemberment was a punishment practiced in the army, and sometimes by pirates. Both used them against deserters. The articles of Richard Taylor dictated that the deserter have his ears and nose cut off, and left naked on a deserted island. The buccaneers were described as cutting men apart, piece by piece. First a bit of flesh, then a hand, the arm, and a leg. One of the most revolting displays of cruelty was devised by Montbar of Languedoc. He would cut open the stomach of his victim, extract one end of his guts, nail it to a post, and then force the wretched man to dance to his death by beating his backside with a burning log. Running the gauntlet was a military punishment, where a perpetrator would have to run between two lines of men with clubs or even swords. Pirates sometimes used this method, called blooding and sweating. A gauntlet was formed, with each pirate holding a sail needle. The victim was made to run through, being pricked in the buttocks, back, and shoulders. Thus bleeding, he was put in a barrel full of cockroaches, covered with a blanket, and left there for the vermin to feast upon his blood. Of the slowest tortures was to starve or isolate a victim. One might be abandoned in the hold until they agreed to join the pirates, or do as they wanted. Jean Levasseur, the pirate governor of Tortuga, allegedly kept victims in a cage too short to stand in and too narrow to lie in, nicknamed Little Hell. In the cities they sacked, the buccaneers were known to tie people to public posts and leave them out in the open for days to be burned by the sun and starve. The worst case of isolation was marooning, a punishment where the victim was abandoned on an island. Some pirates practiced it so much that they called themselves marooners. The rack was a term used by pirates to describe torture in general. They'd say, "We racked him," "We put him under the rack," "Gave him the rack," etc. It refers to a torture device where the victim was stretched out. The device itself was far too complicated and cumbersome for pirates to have aboard their ships or to carry around. One historian raised the possibility that they might have used the racks found in Spanish cities, in use by the local authorities. Then again, pirates were creative and resourceful enough as to not have need for such tools. Exquemelin described similar techniques of stretching. 4 stakes were set into the ground, and the victim suspended between them by cords attached to his thumbs and big toes. Then they thrashed upon the cords with great sticks and all their strength, so the victim nearly perished from the pain. They then took a stone of 200 pounds and laid it upon the victim's belly, as if to squeeze him to death, At the same time, they took burning palm leaves and used them to burn his skin, beard, and hair. Cords and ropes were a frequent tool of torture. Whipping I've mentioned. Another was woolding. Originally, this referred to the act of wrapping rope around the base of a mast in order to strengthen it. It might also be done around the hull to literally hold the ship together. Pirates would wrap a cord around a victim's head. A stick was then placed between the cord and cranium and continuously twisted until the victim's eyes popped out of their sockets. Another common method was to take fingers, thumbs, genitals, and squeeze them in vices. No doubt, cords could have been used for this purpose. They could also have used the vices of their pistols and muskets, normally used for holding the gunflint. Such methods were popular with armies of the time. A slow match was a twine fuse, chemically treated to burn slowly. It was used in the ignition mechanism of matchlock muskets, for discharging artillery and igniting grenades. Pirates would wrap them around their victims' fingers and set the match on fire. It could burn the flesh right down to the bone, and this incredibly cheap and simple technique seems to have been one of their favorites. Fire was very much the favorite of some sickos. The buccaneers set a woman bare upon a baking stove and roasted her because she didn't confess where the money was hid. Others tell stories of victims roasted alive over spits, practiced both by pirates and the Caribbean natives. It was a favorite of Edward Lowe and his associates. According to legend, he once burned a cook alive for being, quote, a greasy fellow. In another instance, they put a man in a canoe full of tar and set it alight. Many of these horrendous techniques had been used by others before the pirates. So too did pirates pass them on. In the Indian Ocean, the island natives took to using the match torture on captured pirates. They tied them to a tree, put the burning matches between their fingers, and just stood by, laughing at their agony. Some of these brutal men faced ironic ends. Oloney, who had roasted men alive, cut them apart and torn their hearts out, was finally captured by the Kuna of Darien. They tore him to pieces and threw the limbs into a fire, so nothing could remain of that horrendous fellow. Many more of the buccaneers got away with their crimes, but perhaps not their conscience. While some were heard boasting about their crimes in the stews and taverns of Port Royal, others confessed them, sick with sorrow. There are many tales of pirates regretting their crimes, blaming it on drunkenness or whatever else. One of Henry Avery's men was made to stand trial, during which he tearfully confessed what they had done to the Indians aboard the Gunsway. Perhaps he'd find solace in the gallows. Many more got away unapprehended, and when their friends died off and their stolen money faded away, only memories would remain, and the ghosts of those they had killed and tortured. Blow the trumpets, I have an announcement to make. Tomorrow on the 21st of October, same time as this upload, I will be hosting a live stream together with Crew of the Fancy, another pirate YouTube channel. If you got any questions about piracy or whatever, you're free to jump in and post them, or just hang out. As usual, thank you to my generous channel members and Patreon supporters. Check out the link to our Discord server in the video description if you want to join the crew, and have a good one.